But wait, I thought I could use my pruning tool as a weapon. I just can hear Billy Bob Thornton's voice in my head. Some people call it a sling blade.
Sling blade.
I call it a Kaiser blade. Mm-hmm.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 231. And we're joined once again by our good friend, the pistol-packing pastor from St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. I haven't said that in a while, and I had to think about it for a second. Pastor John Bennett, welcome back.
You said it wrong. Everybody says Willow Creek.
That's right. That's right. I got to get my country, my Minnesota country on. That's right.
I'm doing pretty good, especially since right now, thanks to the dumpster fire at the DNC convention, Donald Trump is now dead even with Joe Biden in Minnesota. So
maybe they'll keep the convention on all week.
If they just kept it going from now till November,
it would be an absolute landslide.
Yes, Donald Trump would win in 57 states. If you remember Obama talking about going to 57 states.
That's right. Yep, perfect. Today, for episode 231, we thought we would scrape out the bottom of the email bag and answer some more listener emails. Got some fun questions for you today. But first, I want to thank everybody who made this show possible, the men and women who are members of the Reformation Gun Club. And specifically this week, we want to thank Mike and John and Greg and Kevin, Tyler and Dan, Luke, Gordon, Diane, and our newest member, Matthew from Nixa, Missouri. Thank you all so much for your support, especially during these crazy economic times. Armed Lutheran Radio, for those of you who are new, Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and we don't have any sponsors. We don't have any advertising. We rely on the generosity of the men and women who are members of what we call the Reformation Gun Club. Their monthly contributions help us keep the lights on, and members get some really cool benefits, early access to the show each week, some cool swag, hundreds of hours of exclusive content released just for members, and invites to our monthly online hangouts, one of which we had just this past Friday. And if you would like to take part in that, if you would like to join us next month and enjoy all these cool benefits, check out all the information that we have online at armedlutheran.us/gunclub or gunclub.armedlutheran.us, or you can find a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes.
And speaking of the Reformation Gun Club, you mentioned Dan, and last November, right after Thanksgiving, I got to meet Dan. He had flown out here to visit his folks in Minnesota, and we went to breakfast together, had a very good visit. And please pray for Dan and his family. His mother just passed away this last week. Right. Our hearts go out to you, Dan. Our prayers are with you, and I wish you God's peace and comfort in the hope of the resurrection to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, like I said, we are doing some listener email this week, something we collected a whole bunch of them for about 4 years, and over the last few months, we've just been scraping out the bottom of the email bag, and we've got some interesting questions for all of us here today. Starting with an email from Jeremy from Stockton, California. This is for those of you who have not been living under a rock. Of course, you know all the craziness that's been going on in the Northwest. Jeremy writes, "Hi guys, great show. Someone, maybe one of the two of you, posted a quote from Martin Luther about how government should deal with uprisings and rioters. I don't remember the exact quote, but Luther called on the local rulers to put down a peasant revolt with all necessary violence. After months of rioting in Seattle and Portland, Matt Walsh wrote recently that we should send in the army. Do you think it's come to that point? And as Christians, should we encourage or hope for government action that would result in the loss of human life? Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, something needs to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Unless you're one of these, BLM Antifa activists, which really, it's the same darn thing. Mm-hmm. It's just, Antifa is just the white Marxist college students, and BLM is just a mixture of a bunch of these white guilt millennials and African Americans that engage in violence. Yep. There, just as an example, it was someplace, I think it was Portland, it might have been Seattle. They're both the same crap show at this point, where a guy was trying to get away from these rioters. Please don't refer to them as demonstrators, because a demonstration is something that is peaceful and nonviolent. And these guys had made his life miserable. He was trying to get through the crowd. He lost control of his vehicle. They dragged him out of his vehicle and dang near beat him to death. 20 people have been killed since the start of these riots. And where is the end of all of this? And it isn't just the 20 that have been killed within the riots themselves, mm-hmm. but the increased violence that's happening in cities like New York City and Chicago, where
yes.
little children are being shot. There was a child as young as 1 year old mm-hmm. that was shot in Chicago. There was another one that was 3, a little girl that was 3. And this comes down to for love of our neighbor, we should be encouraging the government to step in and engage these people with force to end their reign of terror. I don't know how else to describe it, but as a reign of terror. You have so many shop owners in Portland, in Seattle, and in those surrounding areas that they've just given up. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like for some of these folks.
No, and even in did I read, was it last week, that in Minneapolis, the local government was requiring businesses destroyed during the rioting to pay their taxes before they would receive any assistance in cleaning up their burned down businesses.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I didn't read that.
Yes.
My gosh. Sorry we failed to protect you and let these people run rampant to destroy your business. Now pay up and maybe we'll help.
Right, we'll help you clean it up, but then we won't be there to help you protect it from being burned down again next time. The government here in all of these cities, and notice that all of them are Democrat-run, all of these cities are failing, or these governments are failing their citizens because they're allowing this stuff to happen. They're not doing anything. And then Donald Trump comes along and says, well, we're going to send in federal agents to do it, and everybody gets upset. So what do you think should be done? Are we at the point that Walsh suggested this week, where it's time to send the army in, it's time to use live ammo, and it's time to stop this mess and stop playing around with these people, because all we're doing is encouraging them to continue?
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't like what happened at Kent State, where students were fired upon.
Right.
That weren't in any way behaving violently. It's time to use the Insurrection Act. And these people, they're insurrectionists. They're trying to overthrow the rule of law. They are in disobedience of the rule of law in these cities. They're not going to stop until they start paying a price. And right now, they're not paying a price. You've got the elitists in Hollywood that are coughing up the dough to get these violent rioters to pay their bail. You have George Soros who's funding a lot of this. There is a lot of money that is being pumped into these riots. And until these rioters start paying a hefty price, they're not going to stop.
Yep. And there's a biblical precedent for this, and that's Romans 13, where we talk about, and we've talked about this many times, where the purpose of the government is to punish the wicked and protect the innocent. And what we're seeing is government doing absolutely nothing, and people being horribly victimized. And then you talked about these people being bailed out. The man that you mentioned in the example, who was dragged from his truck and beaten, the guy who did it has already made bail. $250,000.
Wow. And I'm sure he didn't just have that, sitting under his mattress.
No, exactly. And what was it, Chicago, I read this past week, where 70 or 80% of the detainees from the riots and the looting that was going on, 70 to 80%, are not actually people who are protesting about the plight of people of color. They are white college students and people who are unemployed.
Yes. They answered a Craigslist ad that said, we'll pay you a few $100 a day to do this kind of stuff.
Right. Exactly.
And, first of all, there needs to be a standard set. And it's not going to happen in places like Portland and Seattle, because these are cities run by radical leftists. These are states run by radical leftists. I doubt you'd be able to convince the attorney generals of these states to have a no bail standard for anyone who is arrested during the rioting. And honestly, it's not a terribly practical thing, because if you did that, you'd be at full capacity within a matter of days.
Right.
So it's like you said, there comes a point where you have to use live ammunition. That if these rioters are presenting a bodily threat, a threat to cause harm to the life of others, then they need to be stopped with lethal force. There's no way around it. And only then, when they start paying that kind of a heavy price, are they going to think twice about doing this kind of thing.
Right. And to kind of answer that last little question, part of Jeremy's question about, as Christians, should we encourage or hope for the government to do this kind of thing, to kill people? We're not actually hoping or wishing that the government would come out and kill these rioters. What we want the government to do is to come out and uphold the law.
Right. Yes. Yeah, make that crystal clear that we are not advocating for the death of anyone. We'll leave that to Planned Parenthood and their supporters. But what we are advocating for is for the rule of law to be reestablished in these places. Lives, as I've said, lives have been taken. 20 people have been killed. I remember I didn't see the show because I don't have Fox News, because I don't have satellite TV anymore. But I heard part of the interview of Sean Hannity with the father of this young man in his early 20s that was killed because he was attending some of these, he was in the Chaz. He was one of the people killed in the Chaz, if you remember the Chaz.
Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, right?
Yes. And he wasn't killed by police officers. He was killed by the other people living within this, within the Chaz, as they call it. And it's when you have innocent life being taken by those who have no desire to follow the law, then you have to use force.
Yes.
No, I don't want to see anyone die. But if it comes down to the life of either these violent thugs or the life of someone who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, I'd hate to have to choose, but which one am I going to choose?
Exactly. And the attitude for us as Christians, as citizens, should be exactly the same as the attitude we talked about previously. I think we were answering an email a few weeks back about our attitude when it comes to using a weapon and a potentially lethal weapon in defense of our own lives. We're not hoping that somebody dies. We're hoping the bad guy stops. Right?
Right.
And it's exactly the same attitude here, only the government is wielding the sword, not us.
And it's worth mentioning when Paul wrote Romans 13, there were no things like the Chaz. There was the authoritarian rule of the Roman Empire. And Paul specifically speaks of the government being instituted by God for the punishment of those who do wicked. And, for the Romans, if you did something that was quote unquote wicked, you suffered. Mm-hmm. Your death was not a pleasant one. Like I said, I don't want anyone to die, but there is a clear biblical precedent for the use of force on the part of those in authority, that is the government, in order to punish the wicked and to preserve the lives of the innocent.
Yep. All right. Next question comes to us from Amber in Chesapeake, Virginia. And this is sort of along the same lines. Amber writes, "It seems like our politics have gotten so divisive and ugly that I think there's no fixing it. On one hand, you have people who say we just need to turn back to God as a nation. Others who say, hey, we survived the 60s, so we will survive this too. And others are saying that we're headed for civil war. What do you guys think? Thank you, Amber, from Chesapeake, Virginia."
I would have to say yes to all of the above. Next question. No.
And moving on.
That wouldn't be terribly fair to Amber. Yes, as a nation, we need to turn to God. But at the same time, I do not have any Pollyannish ideas about that happening.
Right.
I mean, I pray for it every day. I pray that the circumstances in our world, that our God would use these circumstances to change the hearts of the wicked. I think back to something like what happened on 9/11. And not that I want to see 3,000 of our countrymen die, but I long for the kind of unity and the kind of attitude and respect that people had for their fellow man after 9/11.
Yeah.
As a nation, we've forgotten who we are if we allow this kind of thing to continue. One of the commentators that I listen to frequently, he has a saying that when it comes to politics, that those on the radical left, they see conservatives as bad people with ideas and people who are bad because of their ideas. Mm-hmm. And on the conservative side of things, we look at those on the left and we just see them as people who have bad ideas.
Yep.
There is nowhere for us to go as a country towards unity unless people across the political spectrum can at least acknowledge the humanity and the right to life of those with whom they disagree. Not that you have, of course, there's always going to be some radical element on the quote-unquote conservative side as well, but at the same time, how many conservatives have you heard come out over the last, few months and call for the death of BLM activists?
Right.
And yet you have those within the BLM organization who have called for the death of other people simply because of what they believe in. They've called for the destruction of churches. They've called for the destruction of depictions of Jesus. I covered all of that in last week's segment. So it's...
Well, and this all comes back or comes from I'm sorry if you've suffered through the Commie Clown Shoe convention online this week, but they actually had the architects of this problem that we currently find ourselves in, and that's the Clintons. They had them speak at the convention this week, and the that very idea that your political enemies are not just wrong, but they're evil, is a direct relation or is directly a result of the Clinton years. That is the way Hillary Clinton and the Clinton White House fought back against the people who criticized Bill Clinton's policies. They were no longer
and not just that. The women whom he victimized, Hillary tried to publicly destroy them.
Yes.
These were women who were in some cases rape, in some cases sexual assault, and she did everything that she could to publicly destroy them. There's your first woman candidate for president. It's just sickening.
Yep, and that's I think the reason that we sort of glibly say yes to all three of these questions. Yeah, we've seen it bad in the 60s for those who went through it. I was obviously born just at the end of it, so I didn't live through that part of it. But I've heard people who said, yeah, we survived the 60s, and now those people who were, the protesters and the radicals in the 60s, they're now in Washington. Well, that should scare the crap out of us, because if the same thing happens now and the radicals and the crazies who are out looting and rioting and pillaging become members of Congress 20 years from now, holy cow, what is this country going to look like?
Right. And that gets to the third point that Amber mentioned. Are we headed towards civil war? And unless something changes, if things continue to go the way they have been, where they're progressively getting worse, I almost see it as something that is unavoidable.
Yeah.
Right now, we already are in a civil war of sorts when it comes to ideas. It's just we're just one frog's hair away from this becoming. I mean, we already see it right now in cities like Portland and Seattle and Chicago and elsewhere, where if you were to walk down the streets of Portland or any of these cities right now wearing a MAGA hat, your family might be planning your funeral.
Yeah, and that's I think what has me the most concerned is that we've gone from that idea that the logical extension of the Clinton doctrine that your political enemies are not just wrong, but they're evil, is that at some point you can't. What that prevents you from ever doing is negotiating with or compromising with or being reasonable towards those same people, because you've now told everyone this person is evil. So now you can't back up to a moderate position because all your supporters have heard you call this person evil for so long. The only place that doesn't apply is, for example, where Kamala Harris came out and said she believed all of Joe Biden's accusers and called him a racist just 3 or 5 months ago during the primaries. Now she's willing to be his VP. So you can do
strange
that.
How that works.
It is kind of weird, but when you're talking about people across the aisle in the other party, and those people are now evil, there's simply no way. When you dehumanize them, that's what I fear the most, is that we've now come to the point where the left has essentially dehumanized everyone and doesn't even want to hear their opinions, doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want to give them the right to the First Amendment right to speak, because their speech is considered hate, or it's considered violence, or even their lack of support for their policies. Right, white silence is violence is one of the new slogans. So when you go to that extreme, that's kind of, I hate to draw parallels to Germany in the 30s, where you start dehumanizing the people who are your political enemies, but that's kind of where it feels like we're headed. Not saying that we're going to become a Nazi nation, but that same sort of, I'm willing to turn a blind eye, or I don't really care if somebody gets beaten, dragged out of a truck or beaten in the streets, because I don't agree with them politically. I'm afraid that's where we're going, or if we're not already there.
Right. Yeah. And sadly, I believe that there are quite a few that are complacent. I think this is probably the simplest way I could possibly explain this of why this is happening. I'm going to try and deconstruct, if you will, the mindset of the average Antifa millennial bedwetter, basement dweller. So a moral evil, taking a person's life is considered a moral evil in our society. Innocently taking a person's life, and so that which is considered a moral evil in the minds of the radical left and these rioters and so forth, that because you believe something that they believe to be evil, you then yourself are becoming evil or have become evil, and thus to take your life becomes a moral good. So that which was once morally evil, taking the life of someone who is innocent, is now considered a moral good and a moral imperative, if you will, that they believe. There's some that believe that you must do this violence, you must take lives and so forth, because these people believe differently than we do, and therefore they are evil and have no place in society, which you kind of described it as the Nazi mindset. That's, yeah. Yeah, it's
I think,
scary when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is, and so yes, like you said, we if we as a nation could turn back to God and rediscover, the Judeo-Christian values that at one time kind of held us together. Yes, that would make a difference. Like you said, I don't think there's any way that's gonna. I'm not. It's going to take a miracle, and of course God can make that kind of thing happen, but I don't think even a 9/11 incident would unite us at this point anymore. And yes, I think we'll get through all of this. So Amber, here are your three yeses. Yes, we're going to get through this, and a lot of those radicals are going to end up in running the country at some point. And so ultimately, I think because of this sort of dehumanizing mindset that the left has fostered, I just don't think there's ever going to be a way that this country unites again in the way that it was, even though it was brief right after 9/11. I just don't think it'll ever happen again.
Right, and it's going to take a lot of vigilance on the part of this generation and the upcoming generation. One of the things, and this is something that I believe should give us a bit of optimism, is that many of the younger generation, those that are currently college-age people, that their eyes are starting to be opened. Because when you see this kind of violence, those who still have a rational mind and can think for themselves will realize that hey, there's something that's not right with this. So I think the younger generation is starting to come around, and there's some polling data that would actually back that up. But on the other side of it too, complacency is what is going to destroy our liberty. So we can't be complacent, not for a moment.
Right, exactly right. So you can't sit out an election. You cannot sit back and shake your head and say nothing when you see these things happening. You've got to speak up. You've got to be a voice for what is right and for liberty, and you've got to make sure that you vote, because the left will fight for what they believe and for their ideals and their goals. The right, like you said, tends to get complacent at times, and that complacency is going to destroy us if we're not mindful.
Absolutely. And this may not be something that is going to be popular with all of our listeners, but this coming election, it's not the time to be a never Trumper. With everything that we have at stake, we thought the last election was a very crucial election. Hillary was, I think, a far less of a threat in 2016 than right now, where you have a guy who doesn't know what day it is, who's essentially going to be a puppet of the radical left if he gets elected. So it's Kamala Harris has the most liberal voting record of any senator. She surpasses Bernie Sanders in that. So that should make us quite leery of, be concerned. You can't sit this one out.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's all we have time for. I've got 2 more quick questions, and I think I'm going to save those for the members of the Reformation Gun Club. If you would like to hear those 3 questions from, from Reformation Gun Club Turbo 1889 and Nathan from Austin, Texas, and an interesting question from Philip in Albuquerque, New Mexico, then by all means, check out the Reformation Gun Club at gunclub.armedlutheran.us. Pastor, thank you for doing this. This has been a lot of fun.
It certainly has been.
And thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or any comments about anything you heard here today, any complaints, we'd still love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message or an email. We would love to hear from you and to respond to you on the air or personally if you prefer. Tune in again next week for episode number 232. It will be our variety show with content and awesome pontifications and rants and tips from our entire cast. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.